They gave me a number when they processed me. Not a name, a number. I have it memorized the way you memorize a scar, P338OD, which in the VETH Compact's registration taxonomy stands for prisoner, batch 338, off-world detainee. They stamped it on a tag that clipped to the collar of the gray work tunic they issued on intake, and for the first 6 weeks I kept reaching up to touch it because it sat at exactly the wrong angle, digging into the side of my neck whenever I turned my head. After 6 weeks, I stopped noticing. After 8 months, I stopped caring. By the end of year 2, I had stopped thinking of myself by any other designation when I was inside the platform. Outside, in the small space I still held in memory, where my sister's voice existed and the smell of engine grease in my father's garage existed, and a particular October afternoon on a roof in the 3rd District existed, I was still Davin Oris. But inside the platform I was P338OD, and the VETH Compact would have told you, if you had asked them with any sincerity, that P338OD was not a technician. P338OD was a labor unit Category 4, cleared for manual assist tasks only, no registered certifications, no ratified skill codes, no formal standing in their system. They would have shown you the file. The file was accurate as far as it went. What the file did not contain was the 14 months of conduit work I had done on Level 3. I should explain the platform because it matters. The Rethol Orbital Facility, that was their name for it. We called it the Shelf, sat in a low processing orbit above a planet called Sunvar, which the VETH Compact had flagged for atmospheric refinement approximately 60 years before I arrived, and had been methodically cataloging ever since. The planet itself was unremarkable, a mid-sized terrestrial body with an ammonia-forward atmosphere and 3 large continent mass formations that the Compact's geological registry had assigned case numbers and little else. The cataloging operation was slow and deliberate in the way that all VETH operations were slow and deliberate. They did not rush the accumulation of data. They considered speed a form of inaccuracy, and they had the administrative infrastructure to maintain operations across decades without any particular urgency. The Shelf was not designed as a prison. It was designed as a survey support platform, one of dozens the Compact maintained across their administrative territory, used for housing logistics crews and equipment between surface sorties. Sometime in the previous administration, it had been redesignated as a labor facility to offset the cost of maintaining it, which meant that instead of certified VETH logistics crews, it now housed 112 human inmates serving sentences handed down by Compact tribunal courts for offenses ranging from the serious to the deeply technical trade infractions, registration violations, operating in Compact-administered space without the correct documentation. My own offense was in the latter category. I had been running a repair and salvage operation out of a station in the outer belt for 11 years. It was a clean operation, smaller than I would have liked, but clean. I found damaged ships, bought them for salvage value, fixed what could be fixed, resold the ones that came back whole and stripped the ones that didn't. I had 4 regular crew members and 2 seasonal contractors, and a workshop that I had built out over 11 years from a decommissioned ore processing bay into something I was genuinely proud of. I had tools I had acquired over a decade and techniques I had developed myself, and a reputation in the outer belt communities that meant people came to me when they had something worth saving and did not trust the larger operations to give it proper attention. I had also never once obtained a VETH Compact-registered operating license, because obtaining a VETH Compact-registered operating license required submitting to a 3-year certification audit that cost more than my operation earned in 2 years, and because by the time the Compact's administrative reach extended to the outer belt, I had been operating there for long enough that I had simply never stopped to consider that my way of doing things was not, in their taxonomy, real. That was the word their adjudicator used at my tribunal. Real. My certifications, the ones I held from the independent salvage guilds, the ones earned over years of actual work, were not real certifications. My logged repair history, which I had maintained carefully in my own format since the first year of the operation, was not a real log. My operating license from the Belt Cooperative was not a real license. None of it existed in the Compact's registration system, and therefore none of it, by their definition, was real. 12 years, the adjudicator said. Category 4 labor assignment. Unregistered operator, aggravated by scale of operation. I was 41 years old. I had been fixing things since I was 9. The shelf was old. That was the first thing I understood when they brought me aboard. Before I understood the food or the bunk assignments or the daily work rotation or any of the 47 regulations, the intake veth recited to me in the flat, slightly mechanical cadence they used for all formal communication. The platform was old in the way that old machinery is old, not decrepit, not dangerous in any obvious sense, but worn in the way that things wear when they have been used steadily for a long time, without the kind of maintenance that would require shutting them down long enough to do it properly. You learn to read that wear when you have done the kind of work I did. It shows up in particular ways. In the color of sealant compound that has been in place too long and gone from elastic to brittle, in the pitch of a pump that is pulling harder than it should against a partial blockage, in the very slight shimmy that a conduit run develops when its bracket mounts have begun to wear their bolt holes oval. These are not things you see in a schematic. They are things you learn from years of putting your hands on the actual hardware and learning to listen to what it tells you. The veth did not cut corners on maintenance. The veth were meticulous. But they were meticulous within their system, which meant that every repair that happened on the shelf was filed under a registered protocol number, carried out by a certified technician, logged against the platform's maintenance record, and cross-referenced with the original construction specification. If a repair was not registered in that system, it had not happened. If a component was not in their parts catalog, it did not exist. The system was comprehensive, internally consistent, and remarkably accurate about the platform as it had been designed. What it was not accurate about was the platform as it currently was, because the platform as it currently was included 30 years of incremental wear and several generations of small informal adaptations that previous crews had made without proper documentation, which meant the gap between the registered record and the physical reality grew a little wider each year, in small ways that no individual inspection would flag, but that accumulated over 3 decades, into a divergence that was significant if you knew how to look for it. I knew how to look for it. I found the first thing in my 4th month. I had been assigned to the level 3 cleaning rotation, which was exactly what it sounded like: sweeping, scrubbing, carrying waste canisters to the collection point at the end of the corridor, and which was, by the standards of the work rotation, considered the lowest value assignment available, reserved for inmates who had not yet demonstrated useful skills in any category the veth found worth logging. I was large enough to carry the heavy canisters without complaint, and the veth supervisor on my rotation, a mid-sized one named something that my mouth could not approximate, so I thought of him as Shorv, which was close enough that he would respond to it if I said it quietly, had been content to leave me there. It meant he did not have to think about me. On a morning in the 4th month, I was moving a canister past junction alcove 14C when I heard the sound. It was a very small sound, a high whistle, almost subsonic, the kind of note that a pressure differential makes when it is finding a path through a gap that is not quite large enough to let it through cleanly. I have been hearing that sound since I was a child sitting in my father's garage while he traced gas leaks in engine housings, and it is not a sound you learn to ignore. Not if you have ever seen what the slow version becomes when you leave it alone long enough. I set down the canister. I stood in the corridor for a moment, listening, making sure I had the direction right. Then I stepped into the alcove. The alcove was narrow, maybe a meter wide. half filled by a trunk run of conduit that rose from the floor and angled through the ceiling. The conduit was the original installation. I could see that immediately. The casing was an older alloy, a brownish gray that predated the current VETH materials standard by at least 2 decades, and the surface had the particular dull finish of metal that has been warm and slightly humid for a very long time. The run had been patched in 3 places with sealant compound, each patch from a different era judging by the color variation. The oldest was almost amber. The newest was a pale gray-green that I recognized as a compound the compact had begun using about 15 years ago. The whistle was coming from the 3rd patch, the oldest one. I pressed my hand flat against it and felt the faint exhale of pressurized air finding a path through a network of cracks that had not yet opened into anything visible, but were well along toward it. Not a rush, not a blowout, just a slow and continuous breath, like a sleeping thing that did not yet know it was dying. I reported it to Shurv. He entered the fault into the platform's maintenance log that afternoon, with the careful thoroughness the VETH applied to all administrative processes. 3 days later, a VETH technician came to the alcove, ran a scanner over the patch, spent approximately 12 minutes in the space, and filed a report. I was not told what the report said. 14 days after that I walked past the alcove during my cleaning rotation, and the sealant patch was exactly as I had left it, whistle and all, and there was a small orange tag on the conduit housing that I had not seen before. I asked Shurv about the tag. The orange tag, he told me, was a compact administrative designation indicating that a fault had been logged and was pending repair assignment. The pending status in this case was due to a complication. The specific conduit model involved was not in the current VETH parts catalog. The original installation predated the current catalog by approximately 32 years and had been constructed to a specification that the compact had since superseded. Repairing it under any registered protocol required either a component from the current catalog that was rated compatible, and none was listed as compatible in the current documentation, or a catalog amendment that added the original component to the approved list, which required submitting a material sample to the compact's central registry on a planet that was 3 transit weeks away. The review process for a catalog amendment typically concluded in 18 to 24 months. The whistle, therefore, would continue for approximately 18 to 24 months at minimum, plus transit time for the sample, plus the processing lag in the assignment queue after the amendment was approved. I went back to my cleaning rotation. I thought about the whistle for the rest of that shift. I thought about it during the meal period. I thought about it on my bunk, listening to the breathing of the people asleep around me, listening for other sounds in the infrastructure that I was already training myself to hear. There is a particular kind of patience that comes from 11 years of salvage work, and it is not the patience of someone who accepts that things cannot be fixed. It is the patience of someone who has learned that things can always be fixed if you are willing to work within the constraints of what you actually have rather than waiting for the constraints you wish you had. My father taught me that. He ran a repair workshop for 30 years with exactly the tools he could afford at any given moment, and there was never a moment when the tools were exactly what the job required, and there was never a job that did not get done. You work with what you have. That is not a limitation. That is just the condition of work. I spent the next 3 weeks thinking about what I had. I had time, more than I had ever had, in a perverse sense, 12 years of it, allocated in daily cycles. I had a cleaning rotation that took me through most of level 3 6 days out of 7. I had 11 years of knowledge that lived in my hands and in the back of my skull, and in the particular way, I moved around a piece of machinery that I was trying to understand. I had a set of eyes that had been trained to see what was wrong with things. I did not have tools. I did not have parts. I did not have registration, certification, authorization, or any standing in the system that would permit me to open a conduit housing without triggering a protocol violation. I also had a very clear memory of the level 2 storage bays, which I had passed through twice on different errands during my second month, and which contained, sitting on shelves in a darkness that smelled of old metal and slow oxidation, the accumulated inventory of approximately 30 years of decommissioned components hardware that had been logged as disposed of in the compact's records without actually being disposed of, because disposal required a logistics operation that had never been scheduled. Decommissioned means outside the system. Outside the system means it does not officially exist. And things that do not officially exist are, in a sense, free. I spent the next 2 weeks surveying the level 2 storage bays carefully, during whatever unmonitored windows I could find, building a mental inventory of what was there. Old conduit casing in 3 diameters, assorted fittings, some corroded beyond use but most serviceable, pressure-rated sleeve joints in several sizes, the kind used in the original construction and superseded 2 catalog cycles ago, a roll of metallic bonding tape, brittle at the edges but sound in the middle. And at the bottom of a crate in Bay 2C, underneath a tangle of obsolete cable harnesses, approximately 40 centimeters of gray duct tape, human-made, from the era before the compact's labor redesignation, from the days when human contractors had worked this platform and carried their own supplies. Too old for any catalog, non-existent by every formal measure. In Bay 2F I found the grease pencil. It was human-made, part of a maintenance kit from the same era, the kind of pencil that machinists and shipwrights had used for centuries to mark metal and fabric and any surface that would not hold ink, a pigment stick in a rolled paper casing, simple and direct, and utterly outside the compact's registry of permitted tools. The pencil was mostly unused. Someone had sharpened it once and then apparently left it behind when the contractors departed, and it had been sitting in the dark of Bay 2F for however many years. The compact had been running this platform as a labor facility, waiting. I took the grease pencil and the duct tape. I took 4 sleeve joints and a meter of old conduit casing and 3 fittings of a size I thought I might need. I carried all of it in the leg pockets of the work tunic over the course of 4 separate visits, a little at a time, nothing that would read as significant to any observer who was not looking for it. I brought it to a space I had identified in the level 3 maintenance crawlway, a small dead-end section behind a junction housing that was not on any patrol route and was accessible from a panel that required a non-standard hand hold to open. The kind of thing you only know about if you have spent months watching how a space works. I kept my materials cached there for 6 days while I planned the repair. On the 7th day, during the unmonitored window between the 14th and 16th hour of the duty cycle, which Shurv had mentioned, with the careful uninflection of a man who was not saying anything, I took my materials to junction alcove 14C and began. The repair took 3 sessions spread over 2 weeks. In the first session, I cleared the cracked sealant from around the 3rd patch, working slowly with the edge of a fitting used as a scraper, and evaluated what was underneath. The original joint was intact but fatigued. The metal had work-hardened over 30-plus years of thermal cycling and lost enough ductility that any further movement would open it fully. I could not fix the joint. I could bypass it. In the second session, I cut in the sleeve joint, fitted the old conduit casing as a bypass section around the worst of the fatigue zone, and set the bonding tape at both transitions. The tape needed pressure and warmth to cure properly. I held each join for as long as I could stand a crouch in the narrow alcove, feeling the adhesive take hold against the metal. In the third session, I tested the bypass under load, pressing my palm flat against it, listening, feeling for any movement in the bonding tape, checking the sleeve joint seating by touch from every angle I could reach, and found it solid. The whistle stopped. Before I left the alcove, I cut a 2-centimeter strip of duct tape and pressed it to the connector at the main bypass junction, where the new line met the old. I took the grease pencil and I wrote on the tape strip, J-7. It was not a code from any system. It was the seventh junction I had found and addressed on level 3, and J stood for junction, and 7 was the sequence number. I wrote it because I have marked my own work since I was 19 years old, because my father marked his work, because everyone who does real repair work marks it. When you put a hand on a piece of machinery, you leave a record. You note what you did and where you did it and what condition you found it in and what condition you left it in. That way, whoever comes after you next year, next decade, knows the history of the thing. They know they are not the first. They know what has been done. They know what held. The orange administrative tag was still on the conduit housing when I left. The fault was still logged as pending in the registered system. Nothing had officially happened. I went back to the cleaning rotation. Over the following 14 months, I found 11 more junctions in various states of decline. Some were easy finds, audible, like the original whistle. Some required weeks of observation before I was sure enough to act. Not all of them were life support lines. Several were power conduit, and 2 were water recycling pipe, and one J-7, which I found in month 17 and spent the longest time on, was a data routing trunk that had been incorrectly patched at some point long ago, and had been losing signal integrity so gradually that no one had noticed. Or rather, everyone had noticed the symptom, and accepted it as a permanent condition. The lights on the south end of level 3 flickered every 45 seconds. Had been doing it for years, people said, just something the platform did. You got used to it. I fixed J-7 during 2 sessions in the dead hours, and the south corridor lights stopped flickering, and as far as I know, no one remarked on this because it happened slowly enough that they attributed it to some other change in the platform systems. That was fine. The work was done. The mark was there. My materials cache on level 3 shrank as I worked through the junctions, but the level 2 storage bays continued to yield useful things, and I became better over time at knowing what I needed before I went to look, which reduced the number of trips and the associated risk. By junction 9, I had developed a routine efficient enough that I could complete a repair in a single session for most of the smaller faults, leaving me the full width of the unmonitored window for the more complex ones. Shurav saw the tape labels twice that I knew of. The first time was an accident. He had come into the level 3 access corridor for a reason I never determined while I was still finishing J4, and he had walked past the open alcove and paused and looked at the tape strip on the sleeve joint for a long moment. I did not breathe. He said nothing, and after the pause he continued down the corridor and I heard his footsteps recede. The second time was deliberate. He stopped at alcove 14C during his duty walkthrough, crouched slightly to read the J-7 label, and held that position for what I counted as 8 or 9 seconds. Then he straightened and moved on. He never said a word about any of it directly. What he did was continue to mention, at intervals, that the unmonitored window existed between the 14th and 16th hour. He did this 4 times over the course of 14 months, always in the context of discussing something else, always in the flat official cadence that he used for all communication. It was as close to acknowledgement as the compact's administrative culture would permit him to come, and I understood it for what it was. I did not take it as permission, exactly. I took it as the absence of prohibition, which in the circumstances was what I had. The blowout happened on a morning in what I calculated to be the 21st month of my sentence, though the shelf's interior clock had drifted twice since my arrival, and my personal count might have been off by a week in either direction. I was at the communal meal table, midway through the first meal of the day, when the sound came, not a whistle, not anything like the small patient sounds I had been learning to hear over 21 months, but a crack. A single sharp report from somewhere in the superstructure, the sound of a boundary failing all at once rather than slowly, and then the structural groan that follows a rapid pressure event, the kind of groan a platform makes when something it has been holding has suddenly and completely let go. Then the air recyclers changed pitch. I was on my feet before the second sound finished. The lighting shifted to emergency amber. The PA system came to life in Veth language, issuing instructions in the formal cadence. I had been learning Veth from context for 21 months, not fluently, nothing close to fluently, but enough to work with, enough to catch the key terms in a fast official announcement. I caught habitation ring, pressure boundary, life support bus. The bus. Not a junction, not a line, not a patch point, the bus. The main distribution trunk that ran the life support systems for the entire habitation wing. The habitation ring was where we slept, all of us. 112 inmates in a ring section that wrapped around the aft quarter of the platform. Standard emergency protocol had sealed it. The pressure doors would have closed automatically when the boundary event was detected, which meant the 17 people on rest period rotation inside the ring were safe from vacuum exposure, but were now in a sealed compartment drawing on its own internal air reserve. The reserves on this platform, on this wing, I happen to know from J-9 and J-11, were not in the condition the compact's registered maintenance record believed them to be. I did not wait to hear anything else from the PA. I moved to the level 3 access corridor. There were already 3 Veth technicians there when I arrived, working with the quick practiced efficiency of people trained for exactly this scenario. Their toolkits were open on the floor of the corridor. Proper registered equipment, maintained to specification, designed for the platform as the compact schematic described it. The lead technician, a senior Veth broader and more deliberate in her movements than the others, was running her scanner along the conduit run, while one of the junior technicians held the schematic display and the other staged components from the kit. The schematic showed the platform as originally constructed and registered. It showed the conduit run as a single continuous line from the bus distribution point to the habitation ring intake. It did not show J1 through J12, because J1 through J12 were not in any database the schematic drew from. The senior technician was working her way systematically from the distribution point toward the ring, checking joints against the schematic coordinates, and I could see, from where I stood in the corridor, reading the run the way you read something you have spent 14 months inside, that she was going to trace the entire registered section without finding the problem, because the problem was not in the registered section. The registered section of the bus backbone ran through junction alcove 14C. The J-7 bypass had relieved the load from the original joint at that point, which meant the original joint, the one that had been failing when I first found it, the one that was in the schematic, the one with a registered code and a registered maintenance history, had had 20 months of reduced load and was in better condition now than it had been. The fault was somewhere else in the bus run. Somewhere in the sections I had not reached yet, or somewhere in the original installation above J7, in the ceiling penetration I had assessed and decided could hold for another season. I was watching the senior technician work and calculating distances and thinking about J9 and J11 and the condition of the reserve air in the habitation ring, and I had perhaps 90 seconds of this before she turned and saw me in the corridor. She placed herself between me and the conduit run immediately. Correct procedure. An unregistered labor unit in proximity to an active emergency repair operation was a protocol violation. Her body language was not hostile. It was simply correct. This is the line. You are on the wrong side of it. I said, in the approximation of Veth I had assembled over 21 months of listening. The fault is at the bypass junction. Alcove 14C. The secondary eyelid, the horizontal membrane that crossed the Veth eye, which I had learned to read the way you learn to read a face, closed to half-mast and held. There is no bypass junction in Alcove 14C, she said. Her Veth was the precise, slightly formal register of a senior technical officer delivering a finding. The schematic shows a standard continuous run. I know what the schematic shows. The schematic is the registered configuration of this platform. I held her gaze for a moment. Behind her I could hear the air recycler pitch. It was a small sound. It was the specific small sound of a system working against a deficit, not failing, not yet, but pulling harder than rated, the way an engine sounds when it is compensating for a load it was not designed to carry. The schematic is wrong, I said. The fault is not there, I know where it is. The junior technician to her left glanced at the senior. The senior did not move. She said, with the precise slowness of someone choosing words carefully within a formal framework, "An unregistered modification to platform infrastructure is not a real modification. It does not exist in the registered record. Therefore, it cannot be a structural element and cannot be the source of this fault." I looked at her for a full second. She was not wrong within the system. She was doing what her training and her professional standards required, which was to work from verified information according to registered protocols, and she had no verified information about anything I had done in 14 months of unmonitored hours because none of it was in any system she could query. I did not resent her for it. She was being precise. She was being correct. She was also going to look in the wrong place until the people in the habitation ring ran out of air. "There are 17 people in the habitation ring," I said. "I am aware. They are on internal reserve. I need you to understand that J9 and J11, two of my junctions, have degraded their secondary intake capacity. The effective reserve in that ring is shorter than the registered estimate. How much shorter I cannot calculate precisely, but shorter." The secondary eyelid closed fully for 1 second. In 21 months I had never seen a Veth do that. It was not in any of the gestural vocabulary I had assembled from observation. When it opened again, her face was completely still. "What are J9 and J11?" she said. Not a question exactly, something flatter than a question. "My junctions, I have 12 of them on level 3. I have been doing patchwork on this bus run for 14 months. Come to the alcove. Let me show you J7. She held her position for a moment that I counted in my own heartbeats. 5 beats. 6. 7. The recycler behind her continued pulling against its deficit. Then she moved. I led her to alcove 14. See, the junior technicians followed. I stepped into the alcove and crouched next to the bypass connector and pointed to the duct tape strip, slightly yellowed at the edges now but firmly adhered, the grease pencil labeled dark and legible. J7. The senior technician ran her scanner over it. The display returned, component unregistered, status unknown. She ran it again. Same result. She ran it over the sleeve joint, the bonding tape, the conduit casing, the original run above and below the bypass. Every registered component returned clean readings. Everything I had installed returned component unregistered, status unknown. The junior technician said, in a tone that I think was meant to be explanatory rather than dismissive, "That's not a real code." He meant J7. He meant that J7 was not a registered protocol designation, and therefore was not a real element of the infrastructure, and therefore the scanner's failure to identify it was not a failure but an accurate result. I did not answer him. I crouched next to the connector, pressed my hand against the bypass line, ran my thumb along the edge of the sleeve joint seating. Solid, tape intact, no movement. J7 was fine. Whatever had let go in this bus run, it was not J7. "The fault is upstream," I said. "Above the bypass at the ceiling penetration, original installation. I assessed it 14 months ago and decided it would hold another season. I was wrong." I straightened and pointed up along the conduit run toward where it angled through the ceiling. "There, that joint." The senior technician turned her scanner upward. 4 seconds. 5. Then a different readout, one I could read over her shoulder from the angle I was at. "Critical seal failure. Registered component, protocol flag active." She said something to the junior technicians in the rapid clipped register of emergency procedure, and they were already moving, pulling components from the kit, setting a staging platform against the conduit run. The repair took 11 minutes. I counted them from the corridor. where I had stepped back to stand against the opposite wall, out of the registered workspace, in the space appropriate to a labor unit with no certifications and no standing. The work was clean and fast. They knew exactly what they were doing with the registered components, and the joint that had given way was a type they carried in their kit as a matter of course. And once they had the failed section out, the replacement went in correctly on the first attempt. When it was done, the air recyclers normalized. The tone changed in the way that a struggling engine changes when the load lifts, not dramatically, just a slight easing, an almost imperceptible relaxation of pitch that you only hear if you have been listening for it. 2 minutes later, the pressure doors on the habitation ring opened, and 17 people filed into the level 3 corridor, looking slightly pale but upright and breathing. I was already walking back toward the cleaning station. My canister was still where I had left it, in the corridor outside the alcove, exactly where I had set it down when I heard the blowout. I picked it up and continued my rotation. The incident report arrived in translation on the alcove table 3 weeks later, as I had known it would, because Shorv had a habit of leaving translations of relevant documentation in places where inmates who could read them might encounter them by chance. I read it sitting on an upturned crate with my back against the conduit run. The report attributed the restoration of life support pressure to timely identification of the primary fault by Compact Technical Unit 4, and effective application of Registered Repair Protocol C-117 SUP. The response time was logged as within standard parameters. The event itself was categorized as an infrastructure failure in a registered component, repaired under registered protocol, with no lasting effect on platform operational status. There was a footnote in the appendix, 19 lines in VETH administrative language that, translated, said approximately, the pre-fault condition of the life support bus in the affected section had been partially maintained by an unregistered infrastructure element of indeterminate origin, located in junction alcove 14C, level 3. The element was not of compact manufacture and bore no registered protocol designation. Its structural contribution to bus integrity at the time of the fault event could not be formally assessed due to the absence of a registration record. The report recommended that the element be assessed for formal registration consideration at the next scheduled maintenance review. No timeline for the review, no name attached to the footnote. P338 OD did not appear in the report at all. I put the report in my pocket. I put my hands on my knees and sat quietly for a moment in the bright reflected light from the observation panel, the planet below throwing its pale blue-white light through the port and laying it in a rectangle across the alcove floor. It was a very ordinary moment. There was nothing dramatic about it. 17 people were breathing, the bus was running, the tape was still there. I went back to work. The grease pencil ran out in the 25th month. I was marking J-7, a data routing trunk on level 4 that had been sending corrupted signals to the South End environmental controls for 6 months, producing a rhythmic overcompensation in the heating cycle that most people had adapted to by sleeping with extra blankets. When the pencil gave out, 2 centimeters into the label, the pigment stopped coming. I pressed harder. Nothing. I looked at the remaining paper casing, and there was nothing left to press. I finished the label by scoring the letters into the adhesive surface of the tape with the empty casing, pressing hard enough to leave a groove in the duct tape that could be read by touch even with no pigment. J-7. You do the work with what you have. When the tool is gone, the tool is gone. You use what the tool leaves behind. I kept the empty casing in my pocket. The registry assessor came 2 months later, at the start of my 23rd month. She was older than any VETH I had dealt with on the platform, her secondary coloring deeper and more saturated, her movements slower and more deliberate, and she came alone, no junior technician, no toolkit crew, just a handheld scanner and a notation pad. She found the alcove without being directed to it, which told me she had studied the incident report carefully before arriving. She spent 45 minutes in the alcove with J-7. She ran the scanner over it 12 times, getting component unregistered status unknown each time, and she did not appear frustrated by this. She examined the sleeve joint with an instrument I did not recognize, some kind of material analysis tool that I thought might be reading the alloy composition or the age of the bonding tape. She pressed her palm flat against the conduit run above and below the bypass, feeling for vibration. She read the J-7 label with her face very close to the tape, close enough that I thought she might be reading the individual grease pencil strokes. I was in the corridor. She had not told me to leave, so I was in the corridor. Finally she turned and said in careful Veth, measuring each word for my comprehension, "Who made this?" "I did," I said. "When?" "About 20 months ago, 14 months before the incident approximately." "What does J-7 mean?" I explained the labeling system, junction, sequence number, my own informal classification that I had been using for 14 months and that had no existence in any registry. She listened without her secondary eyelid moving. When I finished, she said, "This is your own system, invented by you." "Yes." "It is not registered." "No." "You are not a registered technician." "No." She said nothing for a long time. She looked at the scanner readout, component unregistered, status unknown, and then at the junction, and then at her notation pad, and then back at the junction. Then she said, not to me but to her pad, in the register of someone dictating a formal finding, "The component is performing its designated function. The installation is structurally sound. The seal is intact under current operational load. The component has been performing its designated function for 20 months. She paused. She made a notation on her pad. I caught the last phrase as she wrote it, because she was writing slowly and I had 23 months of Veth vocabulary to work from, functionally extant regardless of registration status. She closed the pad and left without saying anything more. The review report came 6 weeks later, in another translation on another table. I read it in the same place I had read the first one, sitting with my back against the conduit run in the afternoon light from the observation panel. J-7 had been assigned a provisional registration code, VCE L3PRV007. Provisional, pending formal review at the next scheduled maintenance assessment. In the interim, it was included in the platform's official schematic for the first time, noted as installed by Labor Unit P338OD under informal construction method, ratified pending formal review. Labor Unit P338OD, informal construction method. I put the report in my pocket with the first one. I had 2 reports in my pocket and an empty grease pencil in my hand and 12 junction labels on level 3 that the compact schematic now partially acknowledged and mostly still did not. And I sat with all of that for a while and thought about what it meant and what it did not mean, and decided that it meant very little and changed nothing that mattered. The work was done, or it was not done. The junctions held or they did not hold. No amount of administrative language in either direction changed what was physically present in the conduit runs of level 3. The tape was still there. My early release came in the 39th month. The documentation said in consideration of demonstrated contribution to platform maintenance operations, which was as close as the compact's administrative language could come to saying what it could not officially say. I was given my personal items, which included the 2 incident reports and the empty grease pencil casing, and escorted to the transit facility and processed out with the same flat thoroughness with which I had been processed in. On the day I left, I walked one last time through the level 3 access corridor during the unmonitored window out of habit. I touched each tape label as I passed each alcove, J1, J2, J3, working my way along the run. The adhesive was still firm on all of them. The labels were readable. J7 was exactly as I had left it, slightly yellowed at the edges, the grease pencil letters dark and clear. J7. I did not take the labels down. I did not need to. They were part of the platform now, registered or not. I have the empty pencil casing on my workbench. I have been back in the outer belt for 3 years now, working in a workshop that I built from a different decommissioned bay with different salvaged equipment, and a different name on the door because I went through the Compact's 3-year certification process this time, because I decided that if I was going to spend 12 years dealing with their system, I might as well come out of it with their paperwork. The certification cost exactly what I estimated. It was exactly as bureaucratic as I expected. At the end of it, I have a code number that their registry accepts, and my repair logs are real logs, and my operating license is a real license. The work is the same work, the pencil is different. I look up the shelf occasionally. Old professional habit. You check on the things you worked on, even after you are gone. The public registry shows the platform as fully operational, life support bus rated at 104% of original specification. VCE L3PRV007 is still listed as provisional in the registry. The formal review was deferred twice and then placed in an assessor availability queue that has not yet resolved. No timeline given. The Compact's administrative processes operate on the Compact's administrative timescale, and the universe waits accordingly. J-7 is still in the schematic, still provisional, still performing its designated function. 17 people breathed. Every morning since that morning, they breathed. No one who was in that habitation ring knows why the bus held as long as it did, or what kept the secondary intakes from failing at a rate that would have shortened their reserve below the threshold of the repair time. They do not need to know. It is not information that would change anything about the morning they woke up, or the morning after that, or any morning since. That is the thing about real work. The Compact can log it or not log it. They can register it or not register it. They can call it informal, provisional, unratified, functionally extant, or non-existent. They can write it out of their records entirely and fill the gap with administrative language about pending reviews and catalog amendments and registration assessments, and all the other machinery by which a system reassures itself that the world matches its records. The world does not wait for the records. The world is what it is, and the work either holds or it does not, and 17 people breathing is its own complete sentence, regardless of what the schematic says. The work was real. I knew it was real when I marked it. J for junction, 7 for the sequence. Grease pencil on duct tape in the dark in the unmonitored hours, in the small patient space between what the system acknowledged and what the platform actually needed. That was always real. That was the only registration that ever mattered. I have been thinking about what I would say if someone asked me to describe the VETH Compact in a single sentence. The honest answer is that they are not cruel. I want to be precise about that, because precision matters in a document like this, and I have seen people come back from Compact-administered sentences with a burning need to characterize the Compact as a malevolent force, and that characterization, while emotionally satisfying, is not accurate, and inaccuracy is a problem I have no patience for. The VETH are not cruel. They are not indifferent. They are comprehensive, in the specific way that a very well-designed administrative system is comprehensive. They account for everything, record everything, classify everything. And the problem is not that the system fails at being comprehensive, but that the world is not actually comprehensible in the way their system needs it to be, and the gap between those two facts is where everything interesting happens. Shorv was not cruel either. I thought about him a lot during the early months, when I was still adjusting to the rhythms of the platform and the formal strangeness of VETH communication. And what I concluded was that he was a man doing an administrative job with the tools his culture had given him. And the tools were good tools for most purposes, and the purposes I represented were outside their design parameters, and he was navigating that in the only way available to him within his framework. Which was to say, officially nothing, unofficially the 14th to 16th hour. I respected that. It is harder than it looks to find the narrow space between what a system requires of you and what a situation actually needs, and to hold that space without flinching in either direction. Shurv held it for 21 months without ever once doing anything that could be logged against him. That requires a kind of precision that I have a deep professional appreciation for. The thing about conduit work, and I want to explain this because it is relevant to understanding how 14 months of it feels from the inside, is that it is never dramatic. People who do not know machinery think that repair work is dramatic, because the moments that become visible are dramatic. The blowout, the rescue, the crisis averted. But the work that prevents those moments is relentlessly ordinary. You go into the alcove. You run your hands along the run, feeling for the places where the warmth is wrong, where the surface texture has changed, where a fitting has moved a fraction of a millimeter from where it should seat. You find the thing, you address the thing, you mark what you did, you leave. You go back to the cleaning rotation. You move the canister. 14 months of that. 6 days out of 7, the cleaning rotation. The 7th day, something in the crawl space. Every week, the same corridor, the same alcoves, the same grease pencil and duct tape, the same unmonitored window. You do not think about whether it matters while you are doing it. You do not think about the 17 people sleeping 20 meters from where you are crouched in the dark, or the air they will need in 18 months, or whether the sleeve joint you are seating will hold under the load it will eventually carry. You think about the sleeve joint. You think about the seating. You think about the bonding tape, and whether you pressed it long enough and whether the angle is correct, and whether the fitting you chose is the right diameter for the load. You think about the work. That is the only way the work gets done well. The moment you start thinking about what the work means, you stop paying attention to what the work is, and things done inattentively fail in ways that things done attentively do not. My father said something to me once in the 3rd year of my apprenticeship in his workshop, on a day when I had made a repair that I thought was good and he had told me quietly to do it again. He said, "The machine does not know why you fixed it. It only knows whether you fixed it. So fix it correctly and let the correctness be the record." I was 22 years old and frustrated, and I did not fully understand what he meant until much later. I understand it now. The conduit does not know who put J-7 there. It does not know that P338OD is not a registered technician. It only knows that the joint is seated and the load is distributed and the seal is intact. The correctness of the work is the only argument that matters, and it is an argument made entirely in the physical world, and the physical world does not require supporting documentation. The morning after the blowout, I lay on my bunk in the habitation ring, unsealed now, pressure normalized, the automatic door standing open in its daylight position, and listened to the sounds of the platform settling back into its ordinary operation. The air recyclers at their standard pitch. The water recycling pump on level 2 running its morning cycle. The small clicks and murmurs of a structure that is always in some small motion, always compensating for thermal change and orbital dynamics, and the 1,000 small physical facts of being a pressurized structure in space. Most people sleep through those sounds. I have never been able to sleep through them. They are information, and I am constitutionally incapable of ignoring information. Everything I heard that morning was correct. Everything was within its normal range. The bus was running and the ring was breathing, and all 12 of my junctions were silent in their alcoves, doing what they were built to do, which was nothing. The best thing a patch joint ever does is nothing. When it is doing nothing, it is holding, and holding is the whole job. I thought about the registry assessor's phrase, functionally extant regardless of registration status. I turned it over for a long time. It was a careful phrase, the kind of phrase someone constructs when they need to acknowledge a fact that their system does not have a category for. The system had no category for a component that was real and functional and structurally load-bearing, but had no registration number and no certified installer and no provenance documentation and no entry in the parts catalog. Functionally extant regardless of registration status was the compact's administrative language for it is there, it is working, we do not know what to do about it. I found that phrase almost beautiful, in the specific way that honesty is beautiful when it has been arrived at with difficulty, by someone who had to push through several layers of training and habit and institutional habit to get there. She had gone in with a scanner that told her component unregistered, status unknown, and she had come out with functionally extant regardless of registration status, and the distance between those two formulations is not nothing. That is a person who looked at what was in front of her and found a language for it that was more accurate than the language she arrived with. That is good work. In my 39 months on the shelf, I met perhaps a dozen vets I had any extended interaction with, and the assessor was the only one I thought of as someone whose professional judgment I genuinely respected. Not because she ratified J-7. The provisional code it received was nearly meaningless in practical terms, pending a review that had not happened and might not happen for years. I respected her because she read the situation correctly and found the words for it, which is harder than it sounds when the situation is outside the vocabulary your training gave you. The certification process I went through after my release was 3 years long and cost what I estimated and was exactly as bureaucratic as I expected, and at the end of it, the compact's registry accepted my number and my logs were real logs and my license was a real license. I do not regret doing it. I also do not think it changed the nature of the work. The work was what it was before I had the number, and it is what it is now that I have the number, and the number does not do any of the work. The number just means that when the work is done, the record reflects it. That is not nothing. I was wrong to ignore it for 11 years. A record that reflects what you have done is how the next person knows the history of the thing they are working on, and I have spent 30 years believing in the value of leaving that history. I left it in grease pencil on duct tape in an uncatalogued alcove on a platform I will probably never see again, and I leave it now in registered logs that go into the compact system and stay there. The method is different. The principle is the same. Fix it correctly. Let the correctness be the record. It was always real. There is one more thing I want to say, and then I am done. On the morning of my release, after the processing and the documentation and the return of personal items, the intake vet who had first stamped P338OD on my collar in month 1 ran the release scan on my tag. The scanner confirmed my identity against the registration record, flagged the sentence as concluded, logged the release time to the second, and cleared my status from active detainee to closed file. The whole process took 4 minutes. Then he removed the tag from my collar, the same tag, the same clip, the same slightly wrong angle against the side of my neck, and placed it in a sealed documentation bag and logged it as archived. I watched him do this. I watched the tag go into the bag and the bag go into the archive slot, and I thought about the 11 years of work that P338OD did not contain, and the 14 months of work it did contain without knowing it, and the 17 people who were breathing because of work that would never appear in that file, and I felt nothing in particular about any of it. Not anger, not satisfaction, not relief. Just the clean feeling of a job that is finished and correctly done, and does not need anything more from you. I put my hands in my pockets and walked out. The empty grease pencil was in my left pocket. I have it on my workbench now between the caliper and the socket rail where I can see it when I am working. I do not know why I keep it exactly. It does not have a use anymore. But there is something in the weight of it, the slight heft of an empty paper casing, lighter than it should be, lighter than it was, that I find I want nearby when I am doing the work. It reminds me of something that is worth being reminded of. The work is real. It was always real. Fix it correctly, mark what you did, and move on. That is all there is.